U.S. President Donald Trump says he will meet Russian President Vladimir Putin on August 15th in Alaska to discuss the end of the war in Ukraine. It will be the first in-person encounter between the two leaders since Russia invaded Ukraine and since Trump's return to office in January. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has warned that any deal excluding Kyiv would go nowhere.
The U.S. bought Alaska from Russia in 1867 for $7.2 million, a business deal that later turned into America's 49th state. Now, leaders from the U.S. and Russia are set to meet here to strike another deal that could determine the future of Ukraine. Posting on Truth Social, the U.S. president called it the highly anticipated meeting and set August 15 as the date. He also warned that Russian President Vladimir Putin must agree to end the war in Ukraine or face new sanctions. The Kremlin has since confirmed the meeting.
Russia and the US are close neighbours sharing a border. It seems entirely logical for our delegation to simply fly across the Bering Strait and for such an important and anticipated summit of the leaders of the two countries to be held in Alaska.
Critics say Trump's willingness to meet Putin in person, on American soil, and in the absence of Ukrainian officials may already be a diplomatic victory for the Kremlin. It also appears to be pushing Ukraine to hand over some territory to Russia.
We're actually looking to get some back and some swapping. It's complicated. It's actually nothing easy. It's very complicated, but we're going to get some back. We're going to get some switched. There'll be some swapping of territories to the betterment of both.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says he will not reward Russia for what it has perpetrated.
Ukrainians will not give their land to the occupier. Ukraine is ready for real decisions that can bring peace. But any decisions that are against us, any decisions that are without Ukraine, are at the same time decisions against peace. They will not achieve anything. Such decisions are dead on arrival. They will not work.
Russia currently occupies about 1/5 of Ukrainian land. Hundreds of thousands of people in both countries have lost their lives since the invasion in February 2022.
Let's bring in Domitilla Sagramoso, expert on Russian foreign and security policy at King's College London. Domitilla, how do you see the meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin playing out without the presence of Ukrainian President Zelenskyy?
Yes, that's an important point because it's really difficult to see how an agreement that is reached between Putin and Trump can then be sort of forced upon the Ukrainians. I think that's going to be very, very difficult. So I think we will have to wait and see and find out what was agreed potentially in a preliminary discussion, as we know, with Witkoff meeting Putin in Russia. I mean, there have been some reports that some kind of truce could be reached, a sort of ceasefire along the current line of confrontation. There's also reports that potentially this territory could be maybe recognized, at least de facto, as belonging to Russia for some time. There was discussion, as apparently was mentioned by Trump, on exchange of territories, but I find that very unlikely. And of course, there is a question about the lifting of sanctions, which the Americans might sort of go along with, and the Russians are very keen on, and potentially also some energy cooperation in the future. But we really have to see what is, in the details of this agreement and whether it's going to be acceptable to the Ukrainians, which have, of course, made very clear that they're not going to just switch territory as decided by Russia and the United States.
As we heard in the report, Donald Trump not just hinting at, but explicitly suggesting a possible swapping of territories, while President Zelenskyy vehemently opposes ceding Ukrainian land. You just made a reference to that. What do you take from that?
Well, that's a very important point because, for example, the Russians, they do control most of the Luhansk region or oblast. But the other three, we'll talk about Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. Ukrainians still control 25% of territory in each of these regions. And also, if we look at the Donetsk Oblast, the area that is under Ukrainian control is heavily fortified and very well defended so far by the Ukrainians. So it's very unlikely to think that the Ukrainians are going to allow the Russians to take over all their defensive lines. So I think it's very difficult to see how these exchanges of territory could occur. I mean, I also don't see the Russians handing in, for example, Zaporizhia or Kherson, because the question of Kherson is also related to water issues in Crimea. So I think that this could just be another attempt to save face. Also for President Trump, whom it seems was very reluctant to press ahead with the ultimatum and the threat of sanctions, which he was mentioning. So it seems that this is also, in a way of making sure that there is some kind of safe facing also on the American side, it seems to me.
Domitilla Sagramoso, expert on Russian foreign and security policy at King's College London. Many thanks to you.
For more on this, I'm joined by Michael Kimmage. He's the director of the Wilson Center's Kennan Institute and also a former US State Department expert on Russia and Ukraine. Good to see you, Michael. President Zelenskyy says that any deal excluding Ukraine would fail, yet President Trump and Putin will meet without their Ukrainian counterpart. What should we realistically expect from their first sit-down in a long time?
Well, I think it's hard to expect a fundamental breakthrough because not only is Ukraine not at the table, but Europe writ large is not at the table as well. And Europe and Ukraine are fundamental elements of the war, obviously, but they will be fundamental to a true diplomatic settlement to the war. So it's possible that Presidents Trump and Putin could emerge with a piece of paper from this meeting. It's possible that they could speak about some kind of breakthrough or concessions, but the real work, if that would be the case, would then begin after the summit, when President Trump would have to persuade a host of European countries and Ukraine to go along with him. So it feels like some of the statements coming from the White House at the moment are quite far ahead of the reality of the situation, which neither Putin nor Trump can resolve single-handedly.
Yeah, one of those statements, Donald Trump says that a swapping of territory might be part of the negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. You're our Trump translator today. What do you make of that?
I think it's a bizarre statement. It's not as if Ukraine occupies at the moment any Russian territory to swap for territory that Russia might give to Ukraine in Ukraine. And I just don't think, as Zelenskyy has stated emphatically, that Ukraine can accept any formal handing over of territory to Russia. I think as well that Germany and the countries of Europe would find that completely unacceptable. So it is possible that there could be some kind of ceasefire announced. That to me seems conceivable coming from the summit. I can't imagine any territorial arrangement, especially under the rubric of the word swapping, that Ukraine would agree to. So it's a very curious statement indeed from the White House.
And from Putin's perspective on this, if it's true that Russia has the military advantage over Ukraine at this moment on the ground and in the air, what's Moscow's incentive to stop when they're taking ground?
I'm not sure Moscow has the incentive to stop. I'm not sure Moscow will stop. But looking at the negotiations from the Russian side, Russia occupies at the moment about 19-20% of Ukraine's territory, actually has very little control over Ukrainian politics, or maybe none at all at this point, and Ukraine is moving westward. So, Russia is very far from achieving the stated aims of the war as they were there at the beginning, a kind of neutral Ukraine, or Ukraine that Russia was controlling. So I think all signs point to Russia not being credible as a country that wishes to stop the war. But, Putin could surprise us in that respect, or Putin could pretend to surprise us in that respect at and after the summit meeting.
Michael Kimmage, director of the Wilson Center's Kennan Institute. Great to get your insight. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
And for more, we're joined now by Ivana Stradner. She is a research fellow with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, which is a Washington-based think tank. Welcome to DW, Ivana. So can Donald Trump convince Vladimir Putin to agree to a ceasefire in Ukraine?
With mere words, absolutely not. The only thing that Putin understands are facts and power, which means that the only way that President Trump can convey a very clear signal to Putin to absolutely stop this brutal war is through sanctions and delivering weapons to Ukraine. I do believe that it's important to understand and to hear what Vladimir Putin has to say, to understand how he thinks. But he is often just using those meetings for his own population to portray Russia as an important power. So I think we are doing him a favor much more than he's doing us this favor. So I'm not very hopeful about the upcoming meeting.
I'd like to ask you to tell us more about the Kremlin's likely goals for this meeting and how it could be using it for its own strategic purposes.
Putin is very clear about his goal. He wants to subjugate Ukraine. And for this particular meeting, he's trying to ask something impossible, which is for Ukraine to cede its territory. And of course, President Zelenskyy is not willing to do that, which is exactly the game that Putin is trying to play, to put the ball in Ukraine's court and then to blame Ukraine for not being a cooperative partner. These negotiations are absolutely not in good faith, and we should not be fooled by that. As I mentioned, I really also hope that President Trump will impose additional sanctions on all those countries that cooperate with Russia economically and are buying gas. His decision to relocate U.S. nuclear submarines is a step in the right direction. His decision to target countries such as India is great, but this is not enough. Putin is just buying more time, and my concern is if we allow him to play this game, he's just going to buy more time, which would allow him to reposition his military and to continue his war. Make no mistake, Putin does not want to stop at Ukraine.
Well, we have seen that Ukraine is losing ground and support for this war and for Ukraine is wavering in the West. How is Putin likely to be using this to his advantage?
You're absolutely right. The only reason why Ukraine is not doing great on the ground, it is because we have not delivered the weapons that we're supposed to deliver. And of course, Putin is trying to target our center of gravity in the West, which is alliances, and to make sure that we are not on the same page. And this is precisely why I'm hoping that Washington and Brussels and London are going to work together and be on the same page. Because as I mentioned, Putin is a former KGB guy. He thinks very differently from us. Words are very cheap in his world. And that's precisely why we have to understand how he portrayed this war and why he wants to subjugate Ukraine and why his next step actually might be a hybrid war against the West.
That was Ivana Stradner with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies in Washington, D.C. Many thanks indeed for your insights. We appreciate it.
Always a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you.